They said she was running away from love, but Eleanor Hartwell knew she was actually running toward it. The autumn wind swept across the Nebraska plains, stirring the golden prairie grass into waves that stretched endlessly toward a horizon painted in shades of amber and rust. She stood on the wooden platform of Cedar Ridge Station, her worn leather satchel clutched tightly in her gloved hands, watching the steam from the departing train dissolve into the crisp morning air. Behind her lay Chicago, with its smoke-stained memories and broken promises. Ahead lay nothing but possibility and the scent of sage carried on the prairie breeze. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger. Thanks, and let's get back to the story. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as she surveyed the small frontier town that would become her new home. Cedar Ridge consisted of little more than a main street lined with weathered wooden buildings, their paint peeling like old skin in the harsh western sun. The general store stood next to a modest church, its white steeple reaching toward clouds that drifted lazy and low across the vast sky. A saloon occupied the corner, its batwing doors swinging gently in the breeze, while the sheriff's office sat directly across, a symbol of order in this wild place where civilization clung to existence by sheer determination. She had come here to marry Thomas Brennan, a rancher who had advertised for a wife in the Chicago Tribune. His letter had been proper and kind, describing a modest homestead and a desire for companionship in the lonely expanse of the Nebraska Territory. What he did not know, what she had not told him in her carefully composed replies, was that she carried the weight of betrayal like a stone in her chest. 3 months ago, she had discovered her fiancé William in the arms of her own sister. Their wedding plan for the following spring suddenly transformed into a mockery of everything she had believed about love and loyalty. The memory still stung like winter wind against bare skin. She had fled Chicago not in defeat, but in search of something genuine, something untainted by the sophisticated duplicity that had nearly destroyed her faith in human goodness. Here, in this place where survival depended on honesty and hard work, perhaps she could find the kind of love that existed in actions rather than empty words, in daily devotion rather than grand gestures that meant nothing when tested. Eleanor adjusted her dark blue traveling dress and began walking toward the address Thomas had provided in his letters. Her boots clicked against the wooden boardwalk, the sound echoing in the crisp air like a heartbeat. Several townsfolk paused in their activities to study the newcomer, their gazes curious but not unkind. A woman hanging laundry behind the general store offered a tentative wave, which Eleanor returned with a small smile that felt rusty from disuse. The Brennan Ranch lay 2 miles outside town, accessible by a dirt road that wound through rolling hills dotted with cattle and wild flowers that bloomed despite the approaching winter. Eleanor had arranged to meet Thomas at the town church at noon, giving her time to steady her nerves and prepare for the conversation that would determine her future. She found herself drawn to the small cemetery behind the church, where weathered headstones told stories of lives lived and lost on this unforgiving frontier. As she wandered among the graves, reading names and dates carved into stone, Eleanor felt a strange sense of peace settling over her shoulders like a warm shawl. These people had faced hardships she could barely imagine, yet they had built something here, something lasting. Perhaps her own broken heart was simply another kind of frontier to be conquered, another wilderness to be tamed through patience and determination. The church bell chimed noon, its bronze voice carrying across the prairie like a call to prayer. Eleanor smoothed her skirts and made her way to the front of the church, where a tall man in a clean white shirt and dark trousers waited beside a horse and wagon. Thomas Brennan was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30 years old, with sun-weathered hands and kind brown eyes that crinkled at the corners from squinting against the prairie sun. His sandy hair was neatly combed, and he held his hat respectfully in his hands as she approached. "Miss Hartwell," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of a man who had spent years in wide open spaces. "I hope your journey was not too difficult." "Please, call me Eleanor," she replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "The journey was long but not unpleasant. Your directions were quite clear." Thomas smiled, and Eleanor noticed how the expression transformed his entire face, bringing warmth to features that might otherwise seem stern. "I thought we might drive out to the ranch so you can see what kind of life I'm offering before we make any decisions about marriage. I want you to know exactly what you would be choosing." His honesty was refreshing after the polished deceptions she had known in Chicago. They climbed into the wagon, and Thomas guided the horses along the winding road toward his homestead. As they traveled, he pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the land, his voice filled with the quiet pride of a man who had built something with his own hands. The Brennan Ranch was modest but well-maintained, consisting of a small log house with a stone chimney, a sturdy barn, and several outbuildings that spoke of careful planning and hard work. A vegetable garden stretched along the south side of the house, its late-season offerings of squash and root vegetables evidence of Thomas's practical nature. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures that rolled away toward distant hills, while chickens scratched contentedly in a yard beside the barn. "It's not much compared to city life," Thomas said, his tone uncertain as he helped Eleanor down from the wagon. "But it's honest work, and the land provides well for those willing to work it." Eleanor walked slowly around the property, taking in the details that revealed Thomas's character. The house was small but solidly built, with real glass windows and a front porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. Inside, the furniture was simple but well-crafted. and everything was scrupulously clean. A bookshelf near the fireplace held volumes of poetry and philosophy alongside practical texts on farming and animal husbandry, suggesting depths to Thomas that his quiet demeanor had not immediately revealed. "You read Emerson?" Eleanor observed, running her finger along the spine of a worn volume. "Sometimes in the evenings," Thomas admitted, his cheeks coloring slightly. "The winters can be long and quiet out here. A man needs something to feed his mind as well as his body." They spent the afternoon walking the property as Thomas explained his hopes for expanding the herd and improving the land. Eleanor found herself genuinely interested in his plans, impressed by his thoughtful approach to the challenges of frontier farming. When he spoke of the future, his eyes lit with a passion that reminded her why she had left Chicago in search of something real. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Thomas built a fire in the yard and prepared coffee in a battered tin pot. They sat on wooden chairs he had crafted himself, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast prairie sky. The silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward, filled with the sounds of night birds and the distant lowing of cattle settling for the evening. "I should tell you something," Eleanor said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't come here just seeking marriage. I came here fleeing heartbreak." Thomas poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to Eleanor, his movements deliberate and calm. "Most folks who come this far west are running from something. The question is whether they're also running towards something better." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing comfort from its heat. "My fiancé betrayed me with my own sister. I thought I knew what love was, but I was wrong. I'm afraid I might not be capable of the kind of trust that marriage requires." "Trust isn't something you have or don't have," Thomas said quietly. "It's something you build, day by day, choice by choice, like a house or a fence or anything else worth having." His words settled into Eleanor's heart like seeds in fertile soil. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire crackled and the night deepened around them. When Thomas finally drove her back to town, Eleanor felt something she had not experienced in months: hope for the future rather than regret for the past. Over the following days, Thomas courted Eleanor with a patience and gentleness that gradually thawed the ice around her heart. He showed her the town, introducing her to neighbors who welcomed her with warmth and curiosity. Mrs. Henderson at the general store insisted on teaching Eleanor how to preserve vegetables for the harsh Nebraska winters, while Dr. Mitchell and his wife included her in their Sunday dinners, treating her as family from the very first meeting. Eleanor began helping at the one-room schoolhouse, where her education and experience with children made her invaluable to the overwhelmed teacher. The work gave her purpose and helped her integrate into the community. While Thomas would often stop by in the afternoons to walk her home, their conversations growing deeper and more personal with each passing day. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house where Eleanor was staying, she found herself telling Thomas about her childhood, her dreams of teaching, and the literary society she had belonged to in Chicago. He listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that showed he valued her mind as much as her presence. "I always wanted to write," Eleanor admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "Stories, perhaps, or poetry. But proper ladies in Chicago are discouraged from such pursuits. Out here, proper is defined differently," Thomas said with a smile. "A proper woman is one who contributes to her community and follows her heart. Everything else is just city nonsense." His acceptance of her dreams felt like fresh air after years of stifling expectations. Eleanor began to see how different life could be in this place where character mattered more than convention, where people were valued for their contributions rather than their connections. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the prairie in pristine white that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. Eleanor stood at her boarding house window, watching the flakes drift past like tiny dancers, when Thomas appeared at her door with a pair of snowshoes and an invitation to explore the transformed landscape. They tramped through the snow-covered hills, their breath-forming clouds in the crisp air as Thomas pointed out the tracks of rabbits and deer that crisscrossed the wide expanse. Eleanor felt herself laughing for the first time in months, her joy bubbling up spontaneously as she stumbled through a drift, and Thomas caught her before she could fall. "You're different out here," he observed as they paused to rest on a fallen log. "Lighter somehow. I feel like I can breathe again," Eleanor replied, surprised by the truth of it. "In Chicago, I was always trying to be what others expected. Here, I can just be myself." "And who is that?" Thomas asked, his brown eyes serious and intent. Eleanor considered the question, realizing she was still discovering the answer. "Someone stronger than I thought. Someone capable of starting over. Someone worthy of real love, if it exists." "It exists," Thomas said quietly. "It's patient and kind and built on respect rather than passion alone. It's the kind of love that weathers storms and grows stronger with time." That evening, Thomas asked Eleanor to marry him, not with grand gestures or flowery speeches, but with simple honesty and a promise to build a life together based on mutual respect and growing affection. Eleanor found herself saying yes, not from desperation or convenience, but from a genuine desire to share her future with this good man who saw her true worth. Their wedding took place in the small church where they had first met, surrounded by the community that had already embraced Eleanor as one of their own. Mrs. Henderson had sewn Eleanor a simple but elegant dress from ivory silk that complemented her dark hair and fair skin, while the other women of Cedar Ridge filled the church with wild flowers that they had pressed and preserved from the summer's blooms. Eleanor's hands shook only slightly as she spoke her vows, promising to love and honor Thomas through whatever challenges their frontier life might bring. When he kissed her at the ceremony's end, she felt not the desperate passion she had once mistaken for love, but something deeper and more sustainable, the warmth of genuine affection and the promise of companionship that would deepen with time. The wedding celebration continued late into the evening, with music provided by Old Pete's fiddle and dancing that filled the church with laughter and joy. Eleanor found herself swept from partner to partner as the townspeople welcomed her into their extended family, each face reflecting genuine happiness for the couple's future. When Thomas finally drove his new bride home to the ranch, Eleanor felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. This was not the end of a desperate flight from heartbreak, but the beginning of a new chapter written in hope rather than fear. The months that followed brought challenges Eleanor could never have imagined in her comfortable Chicago life. The winter proved harsh, with blizzards that lasted for days and temperatures that made simply staying warm a constant struggle. Thomas taught her to tend the livestock, to preserve food, and to make repairs that meant the difference between comfort and misery. But with each challenge overcome, Eleanor felt herself growing stronger and more confident. She discovered reserves of resilience she had never known she possessed, finding satisfaction in work that had clear purpose and visible results. When spring finally arrived, bringing with it the sweet scent of prairie grass and wild flowers, Eleanor felt truly at home for the first time in her life. The love between Thomas and Eleanor deepened gradually, like a stream that carves its channel through rock over time. They worked side by side during the day and shared quiet conversations by the fire in the evenings, building intimacy through shared experiences rather than grand romantic gestures. Eleanor began writing again, capturing the beauty and hardship of frontier life and stories that Thomas encouraged her to submit to Eastern magazines. When her first story was accepted for publication, Thomas surprised her by framing the letter from the editor and hanging it in their parlor beside his own certificates of land ownership. His pride in her accomplishment felt more meaningful than any applause she had ever received in Chicago's drawing rooms. One evening in late spring, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Eleanor realized she had found something she had never dared hope for, a love built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and daily devotion. The heartbreak that had driven her west had been transformed into wisdom, teaching her the difference between love that was merely passionate and love that was truly lasting. "Do you ever regret leaving Chicago?" Thomas asked, his arm around her shoulders as they watched their cattle graze in the evening light. Eleanor considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret the pain that brought me here, but I don't regret the journey. That heartbreak taught me what real love looks like by showing me what it isn't." Thomas pressed a kiss to the top of her head, and Eleanor felt the last of her old fears dissolve like morning mist in the prairie sun. She had come west seeking escape from love's betrayal and had found instead love's truest form, steady, reliable, and growing stronger with each passing season. The wind stirred the prairie grass around their home, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of harvest time ahead. Eleanor Brennan smiled, her heart finally at peace, knowing she had found exactly what she had been seeking all along.